All right, so here's our definition sheet. You can take yours out if you want to follow along, but I'm just going to show them and then explain what they are. So the first one is 2.5D, and the definition just means a 2D element which appears to be 3D but is not actually 3D. So this is Maya. This is a 3D program. I can spin around in here. I can actually create what's called geometry. And this geometry has a volume. It actually has like a three-dimensional substance to it, okay? After Effects is a 2.5D. When we create any item, this is right now just in a 2D environment. I move it left and right, up and down. If I click on that 3D button that I showed before, I'll get more stuff where I could actually like rotate it so that it looks like it's actually 3D, but all it's doing is in the software faking that 3D. It's not actually a 3D item, okay? There are cameras in here too, so we can actually create cameras. Oop. And then we can move around like it is a 3D environment. So this is where After Effects is a 2.5D. So it's a blend between 2D and 3D without actually being a full 3D program. Oops. 2D, obviously, just left and right, up and down, X and Y. Three-dimensional, full X, Y, and Z. The reason this is important to know is that, especially if you're in the motion design specialty, After Effects is 2D, 2.5D. There's a plugin called Cinema that allows you to patch right into After Effects. So you could actually open up this software called Cinema 4D. On your computer, if you installed the entire Adobe suite, you have After Effects on there. You would most likely have Cinema 4D Lite, which is the After Effects version of Cinema 4D. And in there, you have a 3D environment. Now, what's cool is that you could actually take 3D stuff from here and say, send this to After Effects. And then it creates this link between the two softwares where you are seeing the 3D stuff in After Effects, but it's linking from Cinema, okay? Which is really neat. So if you are getting into motion design, you will definitely be working with 2D and 3D elements. Adjustment layer. We talked about that before. Remember when we created a layer above all the layers, we applied effects to it and it affected everything below it? That was an adjustment layer, just to refresh your memory. Let me delete stuff. Let me delete that. I'll just make a new solid, and then I'll make a new adjustment layer. Okay, so the adjustment layer by itself is just a blank item until I start adding stuff to it. So if I add anything inside here, like a Gaussian blur, okay, and I crank this up, you'll see the edges of this are getting blurred. I can actually pull it, pull that down so we can see it better. Okay, so there's no blur actually on that solid. The blur is happening on the adjustment layer, which is affecting the solid. And the reason we would use an adjustment layer over just putting the effect right on it is that if I were to duplicate this layer, I have that same blur. I duplicate it again, I have that same blur. If I go to this regular adjustment layer and I start to tweak it, it affects all three of them at the same time, instead of having one on each one of those. Okay, so it just makes your life a little bit easier. Especially when you get to the end of your assignments, you may want to do some color corrections, adjustments, whatever, to the entire thing. And this is a good way to be able to do that, okay? Alpha. This is the thing we've been working on a lot, and I just haven't said the word alpha. Delete, there we go. So this image here, if we brought it into Photoshop, you'd be able to see the red, green, and blue channels, right? The RGB, we've seen those before if you were in Photoshop class or Illustrator. There's also another channel called the alpha channel, and alpha just stands for transparency. That's all it means, okay? So this specific item is showing us red, green, and blue, but it also has some alpha. So if I go down here, this is where our channels are. You see red, green, blue, and then it says alpha. And if I click on that, it's going to show me the transparency or opacity. So right now, see where it's white? That's where it's opaque. Where it's black, that's where it's transparent. Okay? So it's black all the way around. We can see through it. It's white in the middle. That's where we see the item. If I were to draw a mask, okay, remember I can take a solid and I can use the shape tool to draw a mask. do you see how as I'm drawing this mask on the alpha channel, that it's only showing that corner, leaving this area still invisible? Okay, this is going to be important because as we start to layer stuff and we want things to be invisible or invisible or visible, we need to be able to control what the alpha channel looks like. As we're doing our nameplate things like this, where we had this thing pop up, we chose from here, we chose that alpha matte. And basically what that means is whatever transparency this item is using, I want this other item to use that same transparency. Okay? So that's what the alpha means. When you get into 3D, again, this is important because when you take a title sequence and you want to bring it into After Effects, you may want to have no background in there so that you can add a background in After Effects. You need to have an alpha channel. Animatic is a rough storyboard used to understand the timing of an animation. We're talking about this morning. So you've seen storyboards. Anyone have previs yet? Okay, like half the class. Good. So previs is basically like this, like a storyboard type layout. And animatic is then taking that and animating that storyboard. Okay? So if I need to get a better sense of what this is looking like, I could create an animatic to get a better feel for each shot. They can go into very, very super duper detail, or they can be very simple. Some of the more simple ones is basically you have that still image and you're zooming in and out, or you're panning left and right, or you're moving that image around. Some of them will actually break apart the elements and animate each element inside of that software. Wow. Bit depth is the number of data which can be stored. 8, 16, and 32 are typical values for images and audio. So our typical images, like a JPEG you would get out of Photoshop, is 8 bits, which means that there's 256 different colors for red, green, and blue. You can go further into each one of those areas. Not that we need to get crazy into the specifics of these, but some images, like if you have an 8-bit image, you only have a certain number of colors that you could have. It's like 16 million different color variations, and that sounds like a lot, and it definitely is a lot, but there are other ones that have more. So this is, it's called an HDR. This is what we took a picture of the other day. Now this is, what's cool about this is that it stores more than just that straight image, okay? So 256 levels of red, 256 levels of green, 256 levels of blue. If you look down here, do you see where those decimal points are? As I move my mouse over this, do you see how 5 digits are changing for each one of those? This is a 32-bit image, so this is housing a whole lot more data. And what's cool about it is, let's say you took this picture outside and you're like, this is going slower now, come on. Okay. And it turned out okay. In Photoshop, whatever, you can adjust levels, you can adjust exposure, you can adjust these things. But you're still limited because you don't have those values there, right? So if you take a picture and the sky is blown out, you can't bring that sky back because the values just aren't there. The shadows are too dark, you can't pull them up because the values aren't there. So with an HDR, it could actually store more information that allows me to see more into the shadow area and more into the light area. A better example of that, because that one didn't turn out as well as I was hoping, HDR. Photography. So these are HDR photos. So what they do is that they will actually go to these spots, and instead of just taking one picture and just calling it a day, they take pictures at different levels. Is there any photo majors in here? Yes? Yeah? Yeah.
Taking photos helps with backgrounds, being able to decide what you want in your background.
Yep, it does.
Even with futuristic stuff, you can take a picture of that and be like, you can color it differently.
Mm-hmm. Or just shape it differently, right? So what they'll do is they'll take a dark picture, a medium picture, and a light picture, and sometimes there's like 4 different levels on each side, and then they smash them together to create something like this. There's no way you'd ever be able to go to that place and take a picture and get it to look like that without doing an HDR, because there's so many different levels that you're seeing that you just wouldn't be able to do it. Okay, we typically don't deal too much in this class with anything other than 8-bit, but in later classes, like if you stay in 3D or you go to 3D, you will be dealing with 32-bit images. Okay. And what's cool too is, remember I said there's red, green, blue, and then alpha. That's another channel that's saved. Again, those are all 8-bit. In 32-bit, you could actually have more channels than just those 4. You could have like an unlimited number of channels that you can use. It's awesome. Bug is a small graphic in the corner of the screen used to identify a channel. So if you've seen those before on channel 4 or whatever, they have that little channel 4 spinning around. That's the bug, they call it. A bumper is a short sequence that plays before shows in between shows to advertise an upcoming show. You've seen that before too. In half hour, you're going to see Wheel of Fortune. Here's a little 5 to 10 second bumper about it, right? These are important to know because if you get into doing motion design, you may not be doing full motion design, and maybe some editing and maybe some other stuff where you have to create these little quick animations and videos. A channel is something that makes up an individual part of an image. So red, green, blue, and alpha, those are all channels. That's what makes the image up. Okay? Even though we call it red, green, and blue, and alpha, they're realistically just black and white channels. Black and white images for each one. The software puts those together to actually make it look like a colored image. Cineware is that plugin that goes from Cinema 4D to After Effects. So if I was in Cinema 4D, and I wanted to get that into After Effects, I would use the Cineware plugin to get into it. A codec is a software which compresses and decompresses images, video, and audio. Everything we're dealing with in After Effects right now is just, it's just After Effects stuff. I can't give this file to mom and dad and have them open it up unless they have After Effects on their computer. So typically you'll compress it. You'll take it and you'll make that into a movie that you'll give to mom and dad to watch. In order for them to be able to watch it, you have to compress it. Okay, the information is way too heavy for anyone to be able to view it, right? Some of the files that you would, just as an example, go here, there, mini room, renders, there we go. Okay, so this is a project for the next class, which is my 3D modeling class, or my intro class. So the files for this are 159 megabytes, and it's, there we go, and it's just a 3D rendering of a room. Okay, it's just a bunch of different TIFF images. Now, I can't give these TIFF images to someone and have them watch it. That's way too big. So what I would do is I take these into After Effects. After Effects goes through this process of figuring out how to make this smaller. It compresses it using a codec. Okay, so the codec says, okay, let's pretend that half the pixels are black. So it just says half the pixels are black. We can save all this data instead of writing out all this stuff, and then we can just make it a smaller file. The codec is something that compresses it, and then when you watch it, it decompresses it. Okay, so QuickTime, if we go to here, and adding this to the render queue. We haven't done this yet, but we will. We go here and we choose our format. Okay, so we may want an AVI file, we may want a QuickTime file, we may want an MP3, whatever. And then over here, these are all the different codecs that you can do. And depending on where you're going to be ending up and who you're going to be giving this to and what kind of quality you want is dependent upon the codec that you will choose. Okay, so on a lot of these, you'll see that there's a none. If you do no compression, my 150 megabyte file would probably turn into a 200 megabyte file at least, just because of how it has to interpolate all that stuff. So you definitely want to understand the codecs a bit more, and we will as we go. Collapse transformation allows compositions to interact with layers in another comp. And we kind of saw this too. If I have a composition here, and let's say that this layer is right there, okay? So it's in the corner, and I'm going to put this into comp 1 just so we can see what happens. Oops, comp 2 into comp 1. There we go. All right, so as I drop this in here, you'll see that it leaves just that corner piece, okay? Now, what happens if I want to see that whole piece? That's where I would come down into After Effects and click this Collapse Transform button. And what it's going to do is say, okay, ignore the composition size and just show me that whole piece of an object, okay? This is important for lots of things, not just doing this. If you brought in an Illustrator file and it was super tiny in Illustrator and it came in super tiny in After Effects and then you scaled it up and it's all pixelated, you click that button and it says, okay, ignore the actual size of it, just show me what it actually looks like, okay? So if you see any pixelization of your Illustrator artwork, typically that's the button you want to click. Color grading is just adjusting the color to portray something different. If you watch like The Matrix, that was a good example of different color variations. If you look at the broad sense of what colors they used, it was typically grays and greens was like the overlying color theory in that entire movie. Pretty much every scene has a gray or a green in it. That wasn't by accident. That wasn't how they shot it. After they're done with the movie, they go back and they color grade every scene, every shot. And they make sure that we want this one to be more green, so they do that. We want this one to be more gray, we do that. I want more blues here, they do that. They'll even go so far as to color individual props more than others, okay? So in some places, a color grader is like, that's a job, is someone just goes through and grades all the images from one to the other. We do have plugins inside of After Effects. Let me just drop this down to here real quick. There is a, see there's that Cinema 4D color, Cineware. There are ways that we can color grade stuff like this. And then there's also plugins that we'll get into that do it kind of in a bigger sense where it's doing like 4 or 5 different things at once, okay, which is really handy. Composition is what we've worked on already, where we're dropping all of our stuff in, right? Continuously rasterize is very similar to this collapse transformation button. Ease. So we know what ease is, easing into an animation, easing out of a keyframe, same thing. An expression I went over last time. So remember those little little streak things? I wanted them to move with the letter, but not rotate with the letter. That was an expression that we wrote. After Effects, one of the things that makes it awesome is the fact that I can hold down Alt and click on the stopwatch. Now I'm in this expression mode where I can type whatever expression I want. So let me drop something new in here, just like that, and like this. Okay. So I'm going to Alt click on that, and if I go to this little arrow here, these are all the different expressions. So again, the more involved you want to be with After Effects, the more employable you want to be with After Effects, the more things you're going to start exploring and using and playing around with. You don't have to be a master programmer to do anything in After Effects. A lot of the stuff is already written. It's just a matter of applying it to your specific stuff. So one of the things that's inside here is random. So you'll always want something random. Like let's say you have bars and you just don't want them to be just like stuck there. I don't want to go through the hassle of animating each one of these bars individually. You can use random expressions to control the movement of it, okay? So one of those is a expression called wiggle. So if I type wiggle 1,100, what this is going to do is every second it's going to move this box 100 units, okay? So what's awesome about that is that I didn't set any keyframes. And so if I want this to move faster or I want it to move further, all I have to do is go and change that expression. So now I set it to 200, and now it's going to move 200 units. If I change the 1 to 0.2, look how slow it's moving. If I change this to, let's say, 10, now it's going crazy, okay? So you really have the ability to make stuff happen a lot cooler. Now you were saying you want to do like TV bars, right? Like that. So you could do the exact same thing. We can actually have this. Let me get rid of my expression. I'm going to Alt click there. Pull this down. Okay. You can type like a whole setup here. So if I go to this. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit more involved in mine, and hopefully I'll remember how to write expressions. Oops. Values 0. I'm just going to test that out and see if that works. Nope. This is the worst thing about it, is making sure that your stuff is actually typed correctly.
Yeah, it's like if you don't have that one little backslash.
I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to say that. That's what I want. Good. And you see it wrote the expression for me. I just have to kind of customize what I want the next line to be. Y wiggle is equal to wiggle, comma, 200. And my biggest thing is that I use several programs, and they all program differently, and so I have to get into my brain how to program in this specific software. Why didn't that work? Oh, whoops. There we go. All right. So now with this expression, I've basically locked in the X direction so it doesn't move left and right. It only moves up and down, okay? So very similar, you could have just a bar going across and have this expression moving up and down. All right. Right, and because that would be a hassle. And obviously it would be, whoops, I made a mistake, I need them to move faster or slower or whatever. You don't want to have to do that. Yep, that's exactly it. I have people who will use After Effects and never touch expressions. I have people who get super deep into expressions and can do a lot of stuff. The whole idea with it is that you want to be comfortable with your stuff to the point where you can get a job. If you're not getting a job, then get more comfortable with more stuff, okay? Especially if you're a student, play with everything because you never know. I have people who have said, hey, After Effects doesn't have this feature, and they write their own expressions for that feature. There's also a website called AE Scripts. And AE Scripts is people have written expressions or written little plugins that you can use inside of After Effects to make your job a lot easier to do. Believe it or not, at one point, you could not snap your anchor point to the corners of an item. That seems like an easy thing that you should have had. You couldn't. So we go here, we would download the plugin that let us do that, and then we would use it. But you'll find there's a bunch of cool stuff in here. Random. Here's a bunch of different random ones. So a random layer shifter, right? So before, I'll get your question in a second. Before we were grabbing a layer and just moving it, then grabbing this one and moving it, grabbing that one and moving it. Let's say we had 1,000 layers. You want to do that for 1,000 layers? Probably not. So you could download this, and then you could hit the button, and then it would just go whatever you needed. The awesome thing about it, you see how there's this price right here? Right there. That's the best thing. Name your own price. So you could literally put in 0 and not pay a thing for most of the stuff that's on this site. Okay? The recommended is $9.99. You could give $1 if you really like the plugin, right? If it's something that you're making money off of, definitely donate because that's where it's making your life a lot easier. You got to support those people. And you see the stuff here, like there's 2 values, a minimum, maximum. Oh, it says minimum, that doesn't make sense. Minimum, maximum, and then it says shift them, and then that's all it does is just shift all those layers around, which is super handy. Once you create an account on the site and it's free, you can download stuff and it automatically saves everything to yours, so if you accidentally delete it, you can just jump back in and get it. Yeah, there's so much cool stuff on here, it's like ridiculous. We'll start playing with some of these. Yes, ma'am.
Since we were talking about plugins, are we allowed to use them in this class?
You are allowed to use plugins for the class, but just keep in mind that the plugin should not be your work, if that makes sense, right? So if we're doing something where, like a page transition, right? you find a plugin that does page transitions. Well, that's not and no longer your work, right? The plugin should be helping your work. When you get out in the field, I don't care what you do, right? Whatever makes your job easier, the better. But I want to make sure that when you leave this class, you understand how to do this stuff without a plugin. Okay, does that make sense? Some companies are very like, yes, we want you to be able to do your job. We're going to give you money to make sure that you can get plugins and get these scripts and get that. Some companies are not like that, and they want you to do everything with what you have, okay? So I want to make sure that when you leave the class, you know how to do all the stuff that I've set out for this class, okay? Whoops. All right, so that's what the expression is. There's even, if you want to go even a dip further, there's programs that you could actually run inside of After Effects that you could also write. Does anyone know JavaScript? Okay, a little bit of JavaScript. All right. JavaScript is a programming language that works right with Photoshop and Illustrator and After Effects. So you could actually make your own programs that would work for them. So imagine this, you have 1,000 images. Some of the images are portrait, some of them are landscape. You have to go through all of those images and you have to sort them by what they are. It would be a big hassle to do it. You definitely could do it. But it would be easier if that was your job every week you had to do this, to make a little program that would automatically do it for you, or find a program. Most of the stuff you'll find is already written. It's just a matter of rewriting it for what you want. Okay? Footage, video or image sequence. So the this is a piece of footage. This is an image sequence from a 3D software. And if I import it, After Effects will read this as a movie. It's reading it as a piece of footage. Blip in there. It is, isn't it? Look at that monkey. Isn't he cute? Yes. So that's a piece of footage. So if you had a video you wanted to bring in, which will work with videos, that would be a piece of footage. Frames per second. So right now we're dealing with 30 frames per second. Obviously this is important because when someone hits the play button, regardless if you're watching on a Blu-ray or something, there is seconds. And how many frames go into that second is important. On some things it's going to be 15. On some things it's going to be 30. On some things it's going to be 120. Okay. I don't know if you ever watched any slow motion stuff in this class. Usually I show that all the time. Yeah, so frames per second obviously is important. The more frames, the more animation you can fit into a specific second. But obviously going to a player, you only have a certain amount of time, right? If you shoot something on a GoPro, those go up to 240 frames per second. So I need to know that if I'm going to shoot something on a GoPro and then bring it into After Effects and do anything with it, okay? An ident is a short animation used to identify a channel. You've probably seen those for like the Disney Channel or Nickelodeon or Channel 7 or any of those things. In points and out points, we have a start of our clip, an end of our clip. That's all we're setting there. Okay, that's that alt left bracket, alt right bracket that we can set those keyframes with. Keys, we know what those are. We don't know what that one is. We know what keyframe is. Key is a way to cut out something. So if you've ever seen any green screen footage, I should actually type in footage. Something like this. We're going to have to look at that one later. So a key is a way to take out that background color. Now that could be anything. In this case it's green because I typed in green screen footage. In some movies they would actually use blue screens, green screens, yellow screens. The idea is it's a color not already present in your actor, right? So if I'm doing a character who is green, I wouldn't want them standing in front of a green screen because it wouldn't work. I'd want them in front of like a blue screen or a yellow screen or a magenta screen or something different. This is an old movie. Have you ever seen Hollow Man with Kevin Bacon? Okay. So when they filmed that, they actually shot Kevin Bacon using a green suit, a black suit, a blue suit, and I think just Kevin Bacon himself. But they would do like all of these shots where he was like interacting with the devices, with the stuff 4 times, and then they would put it all together. It's crazy. So that's what the key is the way that we're pulling or extracting stuff out of elements. You could also use this for other stuff, like if I had a bird and he was flying and it was a clear sky, I could actually use a sky and key that out. Okay, so I can get rid of the sky. Even though it's not an actual blue screen or green screen, I can still extract it out. Okay. And then we also have stuff like ink in black. I don't know what that meant. There we go. So something like this, I want to pull that ink out of that image. I could grab that and use that image by just keying it out. The whole idea is contrast, okay? Contrast between the subject and whatever it is I'm trying to get rid of. So these things here, we can key those out too. When they did Star Wars, episode 3, yeah. They went to Hawaii and they videotaped all these volcanoes and they keyed out the background. It was like a night shot, so it was actually like a perfect way to just like eliminate the background because it was already black. And they were able to use that shot. Now, it's going to ruin Star Wars 3 if you watch the fight scene at the end. You will see the same volcanic burst in the background like 15 times because they just reuse the same burst over and over and over again. It's wonderful. Keyframe. We've known those. We've hit the little stopwatch and it sets keyframes for us. Lens flares are very cool. If you're Michael Bay, he really likes those. You've seen lens flares before, this. The whole idea with it is that it's emulating a light source and giving it a more realistic, real-world view of what should be happening, okay? So if you go outside with your camera and you videotape stuff, you may not see a lens flare, but to make it feel like that camera is really there and to feel like that item is a little bit more effective, you can use a lens flare type thing, but don't go crazy with them. There are plugins for After Effects that we have that is a whole lens flare kit. Never, ever, 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 ever use the ones that come with After Effects by default. Whoopsie. Effect. Where do they even keep them? I don't even know. Render, I think. Obsolete. That's probably where they keep it. Nope. Key, generate. There it is. And lens flare. Okay. So these lens flares, the same ones that they have in Photoshop, the same ones they had when I was learning Photoshop 3, they've never changed them ever. And I don't know why they've just never done it. But don't you ever use those. Ever. Okay? If you're going to... What's wrong with them? They've been around forever. So if you ever use it, people are like, oh, that's the lens flare from Photoshop. There it is. It's ugly. And that one, same thing. And that one. So if you see this in a video, it's like, okay, well, obviously they just dropped that one on there. If you're making something like, what is that, 8mm? No, not 8mm. Super 8. If you're making something like Super 8, which is a completely different movie, you want to look like an actual lens flare and not like a digital lens flare. Okay, that's the whole idea. You want to seem like it's realistic. Look here, see how this is a different shape? The reason it's a different shape is because when you have a camera and you click it, that aperture opens up, the iris opens up, and that aperture iris thing is the same, it's that shape, okay? It's hexagonal shape. That's what gives it the shape, okay? If it's round, like this one, how is that even possible? It's not. It's digital, so we just don't use it, okay? The ones that are on these computers, I don't have them loaded on my laptop, but the ones on these computers is a whole set. It's the Michael Bay collection. It really is, because it's like everything is in there. It's wonderful. Linear workflow. We don't need to get too deep into this, but basically what you're seeing on your screen is a lie as to what is actually there. Your computer reads zeros and ones. We can't see zeros and ones, so what it's doing is it's changing the information. Now, that's kind of a horrible way to explain it, I guess. Spell it right. There we go. All right, so without a linear workflow, you have basically your colors are off. There we go. That's what I want to see. Okay, so this is linear. When you do stuff like this, when you do math that's linear like this, 2 plus 2 equals 4, and 4 plus 4 equals 8, that's linear. The computer interprets that, but what it shows us is not that. It shows us more of like this thing, okay? So this is when you get into 3D stuff, you'll get more into what linear workflow is. But it's important to see that if you ever get into 3D stuff. The lower third, that'll be one of our assignments. It's that little blurb that happens in the bottom of like news shows and stuff, right? So it'll say Channel 4 reporter, blah, blah, blah. You've probably seen a lot of those the last couple days. Mask. We've talked about that too. It's just a matter of I want to cut out part of an image, so I can draw a mask on it, and that will cut that part of the image out. Now we can use that as I've just cut that out, or I can say cut out what I just drew, right? So I can do it either way. I could even draw multiple masks, and I can change one and not the other. Okay, so I can change this one to subtract, change this one to not intersect. There we go. Change that one to add, change this one to intersect. There we go. And I can really isolate what I want to get. The idea with getting more complex masks, there's a thing called rotoscoping. I believe that's one of our words. Yep, right down there. Rotoscoping is basically we have a character that we want to pull off a background. We can't just key them out because we don't have them on a solid background. Terminator Salvation, did you see that one? No? You guys are weird. There's a fight scene at the beginning between a guy and a robot on or by a helicopter or on a helicopter. That was him fighting with a regular person, and they went through and had to cut out the robot cut out the person frame by frame and then put the robot back in there. So what they would do is that they would use not just one mask, but they would use a mask for like the head and the arm and the leg and all these other parts. Okay. So again, another job that someone would do at a company is masking or rotoscoping. Okay, masking is just the process of cutting it out. You can use the pen tool also. A matte is basically just what you've cut out is just that flat image of the alpha channel. Okay, so I have this here. If I wanted to use this image on something else, that alpha channel would be called a matte that I could apply to something else. Okay, they work together. Motion blur we've talked about, just blurring their animation so that it feels like it's moving. Motion graphics is animation of graphics. That's an easy one. Onion skinning. After Effects, for some reason, doesn't really have this. It kind of does, but not really. It's a way for you to see before and after frames. Okay? So if you're doing a bouncing ball or you're doing a character walking or whatever, it helps to be able to see what was happening before the frame and what was happening after the frame. That way you can see how the motion is flowing. So when I look at like this bouncing ball, I can see, okay, it's coming in like this, and then the next bounce should look like that. All right, that's what onion skinning is. It allows you to see those frames before. Typically, if you do frame by frame animations, Flash has it, well, whatever the new software is called now, Animate CC. What's the other one? Toons. We've used Toons. That's a hand-drawn animation tool. That has it too. Photoshop even has it. But for some reason, After Effects doesn't have it. We can fake it in After Effects. So just so you can see how we can fake this, I go like that. And I need to animate it, otherwise there's nothing to onion skin. There we go. Alright, so there's my ball. I can go under time and I can say echo. And what this does is it shows me the time before it. Okay? Right now there's one echo. I can add more. I can take their decay down. So now I can see what's happening before that animation, and then I can add another echo to show me what's happening after the animation. Again, it's kind of silly to even have to do it that way, but whatever. Parallax. So you've seen 2D stuff, you've seen 3D stuff. Parallax is what gives us the look of having 3D without actually going into 3D. So if you watch any of the old cartoons or even some of the new stuff, typically you'll see like as the camera is panning across the scene, the background and the foreground elements are moving differently, right? Like you look out your window while you're driving and you see these things happening, like the fence right by you is going like this and the horizon is moving really slow. That's called parallax. We can do that inside of After Effects just simply by moving items differently, right? Get rid of my bouncing ball. So if I have a rectangle here, like that, and then I have a mountain in the background, like that. And the different colors, so it makes it easier to see. Good. And then I'm actually going to use this as a fence here, so just do this. Duplicate. And this is why we draw a lot of stuff inside of Illustrator, because in Illustrator I could just hit Control D, and it would automatically like step and repeat it. It does not do that in here. Those are all my elements. Yes. Okay. So I'm just going to pre-compose those real quick so they're all in the same item. Do that. All right. And I've shown these before. This is the easiest way to get to anything. After Effects constantly moves stuff around. So I want to do that. It's so much easier. Okay. So I added offset. And what offset allows me to do is basically take those things and just animate it. Just like Photoshop has this tool where you can take your image and offset it, and it actually like moves the image over, but then whatever went off screen is now on screen at that same point. It's kind of neat. So I'm just going to do a little script here. So I'm going to alt click this. And I'm going to grab that. Make sure that works. Yes, it does. Okay. And again, this is something that, right now it seems like it's taking a longer time than you would expect, but it's going to make it a lot easier. Frame. Wrong software again. All right, we'll just do it by hand then. I can't remember the specific way to do that. All right, so we'll go here. We'll set a keyframe. I'll go up to that. I'll go crazy with this. All right, so now this looks like it's going by pretty quick. And then I can take this item in the background, and in that same distance of time, I'll move it that far. So now we've created just this fake version of Parallax where it feels like the stuff that's really close to us is moving very fast, and the stuff that's really far away is moving very slow. Now, this is the harder way to do it by just animating stuff like this. Using the 3D camera, the 2.5D camera, we can literally just space stuff apart and move a camera, and it'll move exactly like that, which is awesome. Parenting, we talked about that too, taking one item and making it move with another one. And when we parent, it grabs the entire thing, not just an asset. Pick whipping is where we can grab just the asset. I can say just copy position, or just copy rotate, or just copy whatever. Presets, an animation saved which can be applied to other assets. We'll be getting into this, not in this assignment, but the next assignment, or the lower third one. If we make an animation and we're like, cool, I like this way, the way this works, we can save that as a preset that we can then apply to something else, which is really awesome, because if we had 20 things that we did to it, it'll automatically apply those 20 things right to it. Raster is just an image from something like Photoshop. It's just pixel based. And in a pixel based image, we cannot scale up, right? You can a little bit, but not much. Otherwise, you're going to get pixels. You're going to get the little dots there. Vector based, which is further down the list, is a more mathematically calculated thing. So I can make it super tiny when I draw it and scale it up to be as big as a billboard, and I won't lose any resolution, okay? Obviously that's important because if you're going into After Effects and you're making something for a big screen movie, you need to know that the image that they gave you that is like 40 pixels by 40 pixels is not going to stretch well on the big screen. Real-time preview, we hit the play button. We want to see what it looks like in real time. Sometimes, eventually, we'll get to it. We hit the play button and it goes click, click, click. That's not real-time preview, okay? So we want to make sure that we're previewing this in real time. The render queue is where we send stuff. We're in After Effects, we work. We hit the render queue button. It goes into this queue that allows us to render it out and make it into a movie. That's where it does the compressors and the codecs and turning it into a QuickTime. Resolution, horizontal and vertical pixels. We've been talking about that since day 2. Rotoscoping, I talked about, just cutting something out frame by frame. And this even goes into like the old way they used to animate stuff, is that they would actually film live action stuff and then they would just draw on top of those live action things, and that was another way to rotoscope. This movie here, what was that movie called? Can't think of it. Scanner Darkly, there it is. So Scanner Darkly, they actually went over each character for every frame and modified it. They had plugins that did a majority of the work, but they still had to go through it and tweak it and modify all the stuff. And there's that live action to drawing on top of rotoscoping. Now, for us, this is more of what we would do, right? You don't like the pen tool? Well, don't go into rotoscoping then. You would draw every single thing around the person. Now this one, they're doing it kind of horribly, where they're outlining the entire character as one. You typically never want to do that. You typically want to draw around the major parts like this. So you see how here he has this outline here, an outline there, an outline around this, an outline around that. That's typically how you want to rotoscope, is by cutting out each individual part. So like my arm, it wouldn't make sense to outline my entire arm, hand, fingers like this. It makes more sense just to outline my forearm, because my forearm is always going to move like that, right? I might turn it, but for the most part, it's one solid mass. My bicep area is one solid mass. My shoulder is one solid mass. So typically you outline each individual part. But again, another job at companies is to do this. They've actually gotten further away from doing green screen work, and they'll just pay someone $10 an hour to rotoscope. And you'll do that for 70 hours a week, just going frame by frame and cutting people out. You can get paid for doing that. I couldn't do it. Safe zones. We haven't talked about these yet, but we will. Inside of After Effects, you're going to take a movie and you're going to put it on another device, right? So we're seeing in this black area what is visible, what's possible in our composition. But this is eventually going to end up somewhere else. So imagine that you drew something inside of Photoshop and then you give it to someone and then they put it in a picture frame, and then all that stuff that you just did is now being cut off by that picture frame's border, okay? So that's what could happen on another device. A TV, depending on how it's scaling your stuff, might just like cut off part of your image. So we have these things called safe zones, which we can have title safe or action safe. And they're basically ways for us just to kind of ensure that our stuff is going to be visible on most devices, okay? This was a lot more like when we had, you guys probably don't remember this, but we had TVs that were not flat screens. They were like huge box TVs. Those things cut stuff off all the time. And so what you'd have to do is you have to make sure that your title, your actions were inside this inner one, okay? So if I had a character, I want to make sure that they're inside this, and my titles were inside this one here. Okay, and that just made sure that when it goes to all these other devices, that my stuff is still visible. You may have even seen it if you watch TV and you see the little scrolling thing on the bottom of the TV and half of it's cut off. It's because the TV is just cropping that part of the image off. So had they kept it up there, they wouldn't have had a problem. Some stuff you're not going to be able to keep up here. It's just ridiculous to have a stock ticker like that high up, or a news report that high up. But that's what those are for. A sequence is an ordered group of frames. So that image sequence I brought in of my monkey in the room with the pink floor, purple floor, that was an image sequence. That was all the frames rendered out for my 3D package put together. A solid we've talked about, that's just our basic image. A track is a way to match the movement of stuff. We'll have an assignment where we do tracking. This, I think, is probably the funnest thing that I do in After Effects. Because it basically allows us to, not that, that's weird, to take a clip of a video or whatever and follow that movement. So for this one, it's following the movement of his eye. And then what it does is allows us to add stuff right to that spot. So if we wanted to add, let's say, a patch over that eye, we could draw out a patch, track his eye, and put the patch right on top of his eye, and it moves right with it, okay, which is awesome. So we don't have to go through and hand animate something moving with that. It just automatically will do it. Boop, boop, boop. Transition, changing one thing to another. So we've done that too, changing scale, position, whatever. Trapcode is a set of plugins. On these computers, we have a Red Giant Trapcode plugin bundle. You won't have those at home. They have a whole bunch of cool stuff that we'll be playing with. You work on them here. If you go home and you don't have the plugin, you'll get a warning you don't have the plugin. I would recommend downloading the plugins. You can get the trials of them. At least you'll be able to play with it at home. When you come here, you'll have to actually do the rendering of it, okay? If you have the plugin at home and you don't have a license for it, you get a big red X on your image. It's not a big deal. You just come here and render it out because we have the license, and the red X goes away, okay? Really cool stuff. Some of these, like Shine in particular. Shine. Okay, you can do this. So these rocks are just an image of rocks. That's all they are. But Shine is all these like light burst thing kind of shining out from that area. Oops, that's Shine 2. That's Shine 2. They're showing it all in red. I'm not sure why. There you go. You can do other colors besides red.
Maybe a lot of them lights go out.
Yeah. But the thing with, that's the default is red. And the thing with defaults is if you leave it at a default, people know it's a default. At one point, After Effects default text color was this ugly red, and people would turn in demo reels with this ugly red trying to find jobs. Like, no, that's ugly red. Don't use ugly red. But that's one of them. That's awesome. Vector, we talked about that. Vignette is a darkening of the edges. So we want to pull the viewer's eye into the frame. So we would create a vignette. Darkens the edges. The center's brighter, our eye gets drawn more towards the center. We'll be doing that as well. Typically, that's what a vignette looks like. A vignette on an image would look like that. So you see how these edges are darker? And work area we talked about also. It's just what we're actually physically working on. That's it, okay? So those are the definitions. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding of them, apart from just the little description that's written here. There's a whole lot more stuff that you should know about After Effects. Obviously, it will come the more you play with the software. It's simply a matter of just using it over and over and over again. And the idea with everything that we're doing is the stuff we do in class, the stuff I show up here, all of that is simply a 16-week course in what we can fit in here. If I took everything that I knew of After Effects and everything that's in industry about After Effects and threw it at you, your brains would probably explode. You can't do that. You have to go out there and actually look at stuff. I believe I showed this the first day of class, stuff like Motion Spire, where they have After Effects examples. They have 3D stuff too, 2D stuff, whatever. But this is where you're really going to do most of your learning and most of your stuff, because you're going to get exposed to more things. Here we're working on what is the tool, what is the technique, and how do I use it, how do I apply it, and what's going to look good. But that's only for that one assignment. There's so much stuff that we're not going to be able to tackle.